Okay, welcome to the Work and Family PowerPoint. I'm pretty excited to be talking about this. I spent a decade researching this area in and around my master's and doctoral programs. And even though it's been about 15 years, it's fun for me to return to it and see what has stayed the same and what has changed. Okay, so I have to warn you that the work-family research literature hasn't had a historical overfocus on some aspects of SNF families, middle class, heterosexual, white, married. In many ways, the work family field was heavily situated in second wave feminism, which was a white women's movement wanting equality based on gender and was less worried about everything else. The field also added class as a lens, and a focus on work family policy, especially for lower wage workers. But the field is now changing, as is reflected in our readings, with more attention to diversity in families. So let's talk about this overarching concept or constructs in the work and family literature, which is the idea of work-family spillover, which has been studied for a long, long time. And it can be broken down into a few different categories. So we can first just subdivide it into work-family conflict, which was studied the most and first, which is negative spillover. And then second would be work-family enhancement, which came next and is positive spillover. So work-family conflict is the idea that challenges on the job can then spill over into the work, or that challenges at home can then affect our abilities to do our jobs. And work-family enhancement is the idea that good relationships at home can energize people and help them have a good day at work, and success at work can help parents feel good when they get home. It's more complex than that, but that's the simple definition. So then let's get into some more specific examples. So let's start with family to work spillover. So if we think of a negative spillover example, which is work-family conflict, let's imagine that I've gotten into a fight with one of my family members, my spouse, my kids, and so then I'm struggling to concentrate or focus at work. But an example of positive spillover might be that, as a parent, the skills that I've gained in learning how to be an authoritative parent have helped me be a more authoritative teacher. Or it could be that, the social support that I get from my family members contributes to my well-being and kind of provides that secure base from attachment theory that allows me that safety net that allows me to go out into the world and do my good work. So then if we go to the direction of work to family spillover, if we think of work-family conflict first or negative spillover, most research has focused here. And we're going to be kind of getting more into this when we talk about job quality. For example, the lack of flexible hours makes it hard for parents to attend parent-teacher conferences or award ceremonies, or if they have high travel expectations, they're not able to be there, or if they have non-standard or unpredictable or unstable work. We'll talk about the negative ramifications of that. And then something like supervisor support can have really positive ramifications. So parents who have high supervisor support, for example, have children who have higher well-being. And some of the thinking around positive spillover basically is that enhancement in one area can help buffer conflict in another. So if my marriage is falling apart, but my job is great, that helps kind of buffer my well-being overall. Similarly, if my job sucks, but my relationship is solid, this helps reduce my work stress. Let's get more into paid work. So when we think about what makes for high quality jobs, this is what the research says, and this is, as you can see, more based on being an employee than self-employed. And so Stable employment, obviously better, right? Knowing that you're going to have a job and keep a job. And flexibility, we're going to talk more about, better than lack of flexibility. Higher wages better than lower wages. We're going to get more into standard and non-standard work schedules, or predictable and unpredictable work schedules. Work hours is an interesting one, is that it's kind of the Goldilocks. It's good to have it be just right. So too many in your overtime, lots of overtime, you might be stressed. Too little, right, and you're economically stressed. So having it just in the right amount. Having obviously more benefits and paid time off, whether that's vacation or sick leave. And it's important to note here that white individuals are more likely to have all of these things as compared to Black and Latinx workers. Supervisor support is a lot more beneficial than supervisor harshness. And supervisor support is, as we're doing in our readings, correlated with warmer parenting, less job pressure, less burnout, higher job satisfaction, and higher parent and child well-being. And in fact, when I read this section on supervisor support and supervisor harshness, I sent it to my supervisor with a thank you for being so supportive and reminding her that it not only affects my well-being, but that of my family too. Coworker support is getting a little bit more attention for, its benefits or lack thereof. And so when you have coworker support, it's helpful for covering unpredictable events. It's associated with fewer depressive symptoms for parents. But yet when you experience coworker isolation or discrimination, that has more negative effects, or you don't get those benefits. And research has found that Black workers, for example, have fewer social ties on the job, whether that's due to just not associating socially with people of a different race, or if that's due to outright discrimination or perceived discrimination. But that is a pattern and sad, right? And another way that being a person of color in our society just kind of slowly kind of chips away at your ability to succeed and feel good. And then job pressure, like work hours or like stress, for example, that's curvilinear. We want it to be somewhere in the middle. When you've got not enough job pressure, right, you're bored, you're not motivated. When you've got too much job pressure, you're super stressed. So we want to be, in the middle there. And then lots of research has been done in workplaces on having things like autonomy, which is things like control, initiative, decision-making, self-direction, authority. And the more you have that, the better, right, for your well-being. And that can also positively spill over into how you relate with your kids too. So we are giving more attention over the last couple of decades, but increasingly as well, to non-standard or unpredictable work hours. So we've had a 24/7 economy for some time, and that's meaned increasing rates of non-standard or unpredictable work hours, especially for low-income individuals. And so non-standard is evening, weekends, rotating, and unpredictable is more variable, that you might even be called in as needed. You're not sure how many hours you're going to get each week, that kind of gig economy idea. And so again, this is workers with less education, and particularly mothers, are more likely to be working non-standard hours. And mothers who are working non-standard hours have children who on average have more internalizing or externalizing issues, so more anxiety, depression, or acting out aggression, behavior problems, poor sleep, higher rates of obesity, and lower reading levels academically. And yet we don't see the same effects for children of fathers with non-standard work schedules. Children of fathers are more influenced by how many hours fathers work rather than when they work. So important to keep in mind when working with families and creating policies. And then lastly, when you have one family member with non-standard or particularly unpredictable work schedules, that has implications for kin work, with this idea of web of time. If you're If you have an unpredictable work schedule and you're part of a group of family members taking care of an aging family member, now the other family members aren't sure when you're going to be able to do it, and then that creates more unpredictability for them. So here's a little bit more on job quality of working mothers and working fathers. So fathers do place more importance than mothers on having a high-paying job, but you can see they still place less emphasis on having high pay compared to flexibility, both fathers and mothers. Mothers are definitely more concerned than fathers with having a flexible schedule, although 50% of fathers want workplace flexibility as well. And then everyone wants job security and a job that they enjoy. So a really important aspect of job quality, as we've talked about, is flexibility. Flexibility is linked to job satisfaction, health, perception of more time for self and family. There's a lot of research findings on it. And retention, if you want to know more about flexibility, check out the Families and Work Institute. They put out some recent reports on flexibility, including changes in flexibility associated with COVID-19, which has probably been one of the single biggest events to change the experience of flexibility in the workplace. In general, we know that low-wage workers have less flexibility than higher wage workers. So here's all the different forms that flexibility can take. So you can have flexibility around the time of day that you work. So can you get your work done anytime as long as it's done? So that would be, my job, right? I can work on the weekends, I can work in the evenings, I can work in the mornings, as long as I'm ready when I'm supposed to be ready for something. How about the flexibility in the amount of hours? So again, that's working to task, not to time. So not having to be tied to a desk or a store for a certain amount of time. Again, my job, I just have to get my tasks done more than I have to work a certain amount of time. If you don't have that flexibility in terms of when you're working and how much you're working, can you have a choice in your consistent work shift? So you could choose 7 to 4, you could choose 8 to 5, or you're not tied to an 8 to 5 schedule if you'd prefer something different. Do you have the option for a compressed work week? So can you work 4 10-hour days or 9 9-hour days with every other Monday or Friday off? If your work schedule is going to be inconsistent, can you sign up, or is it assigned to you? Can you leave to do things for your kids? And do you have flexibility even as to when you take your lunch break or other breaks? Then, of course, there's flexibility around where you work. And again, huge shift with COVID, right? Telecommuting has always been somewhat controversial. Some companies more supportive, some companies not. And so now I think this will be one of our biggest changes, is that we're allowing people to work from other locations. And then, do you have flexibility in how much you are working? So can you shift from part-time to full-time, or could you shift from full-time to part-time? Is that up to you? So now let's get into gender and how it relates to work hours and wages, and how we think about women's and men's roles in terms of paid work. So before we get into some of the more specific research findings, let's just look at the big picture regarding gender and paid work. So women and mothers are working and earning more than they ever have before, but men are much more likely to work full-time and overtime, and we hold them more responsible for work. So this means that the separate spheres ideology continues to exist. However, there's caveats. Black women have never really fit the separate spheres ideology. We've had different societal expectations for the paid work of white women and Black women. So we have historically told white women to stay at home, white mothers to stay at home, and Black mothers to get to work. So separate spheres has been more of a white mother and father phenomenon. So although men and fathers are more likely to work full-time than women and mothers, again, more mothers than ever are working full-time. Part-time work has stayed about the same, you can see in the first graph. which is all working mothers, married, cohabiting, or single. The second graph is two-parent households, either married or cohabiting, different gender households. And what we can see there is that there's an increase in two-parent full-time and also mom full-time and dad part-time families, or dad not employed families, and a decrease in families where basically mom is a stay-at-home mom and dad is working full-time. So here's where the separate spheres ideology also comes back in. Of women who are employed full-time, 84% think working full-time is ideal, but of the American public, only about 33% think a full-time working mother is ideal, yet about 76% think fathers working full-time is ideal. So separate spheres, that ideology is changing, right? Because we have more women working full-time, yet this also kind of supports the controversy or the mixed messages around it, and perhaps the judgment that working mothers feel. So among same-gender couples, breadwinning mothers are consistently increasing, with women now are out-earning their male partners, almost a third of the time. However, when we look at breadwinning mothers, Black mothers are much more likely than any other racial or ethnic group, white mothers, Latinx mothers, Asian mothers, to be breadwinners, especially if they're unmarried, you can see there. And so it's important to note that idea of the breadwinner homemaker gender ideology, again, maybe never really quite applied to African American mothers. So even though among different gender couples, women are the breadwinners 31% of the time, and men's breadwinning has been declining, it is still not what we think it means for a woman to be a good partner or a wife, being a breadwinner. So in the second graph, we can see that 71% of people think men need to support a family financially in order to be a good partner, versus only 32% of people think women need to be able to financially support a family in order to be a good partner. But in other ways, as you can see in the second graph, caring, household labor, self-sufficiency, we have more similar expectations. So this just shows us that the male breadwinner ideology is a hard one to shake. So the motherhood penalty describes the gap in wage earnings between mothers and non-mothers. And the data from these graphs are pulled from the years around 2000, when respondents were around 20 to 40 years of age. So they certainly may have changed now. What we can see is that the motherhood wage gap is the largest for white heterosexual women with 3 or more kids. So it does increase with the amount of kids for women. The higher wages among whites, or basically the reason why we might see a higher wage gap for whites is because whites on average are earning higher wages, and so this allows for more of a potential wage gap. But it's important to keep in mind that even though the wage gap is higher for white heterosexual women, Black and Latinx mothers earn less on average than white women. So 2 of the theories for why women earn less are energy depletion, which is that mothers' household labor or childcare responsibilities lead them to deprioritize work, which then leads to lower wages, or status-based discrimination, that mothers are perceived as less than ideal workers and are thus not paid as well for equally hard efforts, or not given as many promotions. And so in the graph here, the first part I think shows the evidence for energy depletion, that mothers do feel more of the need to cut back or feel like they can't give as much 100% or might turn down a promotion. And then the second, the lower portion of the graph, talks about maybe status-based discrimination at work, where mothers feel like they're not seen as ideal workers. So, evidence for both of these hypotheses or theories is mixed. So for fathers, we don't see the penalty, we see the bonus, we see the opposite pattern. Basically, men who are fathers earn more than men who aren't fathers. But this is mainly for men who are white, educated, high earning, or white collar, so any of those factors. And so the possibilities are, why is this? Is it because it's somehow reinforcing hegemonic masculinity, which is also known as kind of who's the more dominant or powerful man, and we see white men that way, and so perhaps we see white fathers as more in need of more advancement in pay, as more ideal workers, for example, than fathers of color. And then it can also be selection effects, which there's some fairly strong evidence for, which is just that idea that men who are earning, we've kind of learned about this already in the class, that basically men who are earning more money or have more education are more likely to get married and more likely to become fathers. So let's turn our attention to unpaid work, and more specifically household labor, parenting, and kin work. So again, let me give you the big picture. Fathers are doing more housework, parenting, and kin work than ever before, but mothers still do more, and we hold them more responsible for it. So when we think about household labor, and separate spheres, that's really continued to hold strong. And so this quote from Perry, Jenkins, and Gerstle says, for more than half a century, gender has been the main theme of the story of research on housework, and it still is. So what we see is that mothers are, while decreasing their labor, are still responsible for the majority of physical and especially mental and organizational labor. Mental and organizational labor is sometimes referred to as invisible labor. So the example is, my parents are coming this weekend, here's the chores we need to do. Or your parents are coming this weekend, here's the chores we need to do. A friend of mine was getting married, and he told his fiance that he wanted to be an equal part in all of the wedding plans. Like, he was really trying to do his part of the labor. And the fiance said back to him, I don't want to tell you what to do. I want you to think of the stuff that needs to get done. So that's the mental or organizational labor. Regarding household labor, we've had a view of mothers as primary and fathers as helpers, changing perhaps, but still persisting. And on average, fathers do less housework and cooking, engage less with their kids, and have more relaxation and leisure. We're going to look at that time. The gaps aren't as dramatic as they used to be. And we're going to see that, again, perceptions of equity matter more than actuality. So this is parents' labor, whether married or single. And so over time, you can see that mothers and fathers' labor time has begun to converge more. So since 1965, mothers have almost tripled the amount of paid work they do each week, but they still lag behind fathers, who work on average 37 hours per week compared to mothers' 21 hours. And this was 2011, so this is a little older now. Meanwhile, fathers have increased their housework and their child care, but still only do about half of what mothers do. So 7 hours for fathers compared to 13 hours of child care, for example, for mothers. Today's mothers, you can actually see, spend more time with their children than mothers did in the 1960s, because this is more focused on, direct interaction with kids, not just being at home while your kids are out and about in the community or the neighborhood. Okay, so this graph shows two-parent dual income households, both married and cohabiting. So what you can see is that mothers and fathers in these dual income households spend a comparable amount of time working each week once you combine paid work, childcare, and housework. And so the difference there is just about 1 hour more for 1 hour more per week for mothers. So this data would suggest that that second shift that Arlie Russell Hochschild identified in the 1990s, where employed mothers go to work for pay and then come home and do a second shift that's longer in the evening than their counterpart husbands, that's basically declining. Other research has found that men do spend more time than women in leisure activities, such as watching TV, playing games, socializing, and exercising. So among parents with children under the age of 18, fathers spend on average 28 hours per week on leisure, while mothers spend 25 hours on leisure. So this graph shows a difference of 1 hour in paid and unpaid work. Leisure shows more of a difference of about 3 hours per week. So in families with two full-time working parents, we are seeing more equal sharing, but if someone does more, it's generally the mother, especially as we can see in more traditionally feminine tasks like meal prep and grocery shopping. The most egalitarian couples are those that are Black, same-sex, and or middle class. Although working class couples are gaining in egalitarianism, and this is a shift from like the earlier decades. In particular, when we think about these feminine, traditionally feminine tasks that women still often do, we see that especially for Latinx and Asian women who are doing significantly more cooking and cleaning compared to their male partners, but also compared to white and Black women. Okay, so in terms of parenting and gender, this is where there's been more narrowing. So mothers still do more at all ages, especially again when we think of that organizational and mental labor that's specific to kids, so it's not just who takes them to soccer practice, it's who set up the whole carpool, right? It's not just who gets them to the dentist, it's who remembered to schedule the appointment and did that. So, mothers are still outperforming there, and you can see that on the graph that's the biggest difference is managing children's schedules and activities in terms of two-parent full-time working households where mothers and fathers are more different. Mothers are doing more. But again, fathers in different gender couples are doing more than ever, and of course single fathers as well. But fathers in different gender couples are especially doing more when mothers earn more and work more. So I think you've learned this before, but the effects of housework, divisions of labor on housework and childcare are really about fairness, not about actual kind of hours so much. So it's more about how you feel about how you're dividing things up, although certainly it's easier to feel like things are more fair when they're closer together. But fairness is really the mechanism by which relationship satisfaction or well-being is affected, particularly for women. Okay, so parenting is becoming more central to people's identity than in the past. And we can see this when we compare kind of the findings for baby boomer parents with millennial or Gen X parents. So in the past, maybe more like 50% of boomers were saying being a parent is extremely important to their identity, but millennial parents and Gen X parents are closer to 60% when they talk about how important being a parent is. So parenting has become more central, and we have kind of higher expectations of more intensive, the norm of parental care, more intensive parenting. And you can see that mothers and fathers are both fairly similar on this in terms of their agreement. Among full-time working parents, dads spend less time with their kids than mom do. Although both parents, again, are spending more time with their kids than generations in the past. But it's fathers who say that they want more time with kids. And this mirrors older research that Ellen Galinsky did with kids. When asked who they wanted more time with, kids generally said fathers that they wanted more time with, not mothers. More than mothers, I should say. Okay, for kin work, which is, typically caring for other relatives, and gender, we're going to see a similar pattern here. First off, when we think of kin work, that generally involves about 2/3 of the time your parents or your in-laws, but about 1/3 of the time other relatives. Again, women are still doing more. So in different gender couples, wives perform more than husbands. Within families, daughters on average do more than sons. Yet again, men's kin work is increasing, and it's higher if they're older, retired, married, or in a blue-collar occupation. And that last one I thought was interesting. And I speculated that perhaps when people are in blue-collar occupations, they're maybe more likely to work or to live in the same town as family members because their jobs are less likely to have caused them to move somewhere else in the country. And so then maybe that puts them in closer proximity to provide care.